Hello everyone. Good evening. Good anong araw na ba ngayon? Wednesday. Yan. Medyo disoriented na tayo. Natapos na natin yung mga marathon interviews natin on Sona. I lost count of it. So now, back naman tayo sa foreign policy agenda. Speaking of foreign policy, pag-usapan natin yung latest travel ni President Marcos Jr. this time to neighboring Malaysia. Malaysia, truly Asia. Kamusta naman kayo dyan? Yan. Salamat ka di. Oh. Pag-usapan natin yan. So, what's this trip all about? Ngayon pa lang nakita natin yung mga katatay, yung mga nagmamahal sa kanilang dyan sa China ay nagsasabi, kamusta naman si Marcos Jr.? Is he gonna raise the Sabah issue? Is he gonna take a tough stance dun sa ating territorial disputes? Ganyan talaga yung mga style ng mga katatay dyan. Pag-usapan natin yan. But for me, before we go into the discussion of the Malaysia trip, there are two things that we have to keep in mind, no? One is Maharlika Sovereign Wealth Fund, because earlier this year, no less than Prime Minister of Malaysia, Anwar Ibrahim himself, warned the Philippines against potential repeat of what happened in his own country, diba? Pag-usapan natin yung 1MDB corruption scandal. There was a huge best-selling book on that, the Great Whale. I mean, grabe yung level of corruption dyan. Of course, that movie, Wolf of Wall Street, quite interestingly, paradoxically, but perhaps sensibly, was related dito sa 1MDB kasi some of the funds from that sovereign wealth fund supposedly ended up helping, producing the movie Wolf of Wall Street. So, quite ironic or perhaps not. Pag-usapan din natin dito today what happened actually shortly before President Marcos Jr. left for his trip to Malaysia, because we saw very warm interaction, very warm dynamics and rapport between Martin Romualdez, the current Speaker of the House, the de facto right man of the President, and of course, ka-Uniteam, Sara Duterte, ang ating Vice-Presidente. Yan. So there was also some analysis on that, what's that all about. So you could see there, dito sa picture na yan, sa caption na yan, ng video na yan, how President Marcos Jr. felt so suave, so happy, so relaxed. So unity pa rin daw. The unity picture is intact. This is what the picture suggests. But, Philippine politics being Philippine politics, pag-usapan din natin yan. Alright. Okay. Before we go into those issues, let's just talk about the big picture here. So what is the visit going to be all about? Ayon kay President Marcos Jr., of course, Malaysia is a very important country for us. After all, this is one of the biggest economies in the region, one of the most advanced economies in Asia, a manufacturing powerhouse. O yung mga iba dyan, kung alam niyo na kung meron kayong mga luxury products or luxury cars, let's say BMW, etc. Alam niyo naman, galing yan sa Malaysia, hindi hindi sa Germany. So, a lot of the high-end products in the Philippines, they don't directly come from Europe. A lot of them come actually from Malaysia, especially with automobiles, for instance. No, so Malaysia is a manufacturing powerhouse. It has not managed to develop the kind of global brands that we see in South Korea and Taiwan. That's really their shortcoming. But they produce a lot of manufacturing products, increasingly high-end products. No, now pag-usapan natin etong trip ni Marcos Jr. So so Malaysia is not just any country, but the other thing that makes Malaysia very, very important is that it's the center of global Islamic financing. We're talking about a $1 trillion industry. I mean, as far as Islamic financing is concerned, kasama dyan yung mga mayaman na bansa like United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Saudi Arabia. But outside the Middle East region and those oil-rich Persian Gulf countries, we're going to talk about also countries like Turkey, but more importantly, even Malaysia. So Malaysia is a big, big country when it comes to Islamic banking and financing. And of course, alam niyo naman sa Islamic banking and financing, there are some very strict rules on interest rate. There's some strict rules, in terms of, make sure na halal or religiously compliant, no? The kind of transactions that are going to be made. One reason why Islamic banking is doing very well over the past decade or so is because hindi sila nasangkot dun sa mga kalokohan which brought back down the Wall Street, no? The questionable, speculative investment practices. So Islamic banking is a big thing. It has been very successful, slow but steadily. It has been going through the ranks, and you have big, rich countries, as I said, United Arab Emirates, Emirat Al Arabiya, Al Qatar, and Turkey, and now of course even Malaysia involved in that. Now, Malaysia is also big for us in the Philippines because marami sa ating mga kababayan, mga OFWs, especially sa mga ating mga kapatid, no, na Muslim from Sulu area, our Tausug brother and sister, a lot of our Muslim brothers and sisters from Mindanao area, they have deep historical roots dyan sa Sabah, obviously malaking issue din itself, and those borders are very porous. Those borders are very porous. And those borders being porous, of course, also has a downside, and that's piracy, maritime piracy, and not to mention problems with terrorism. No, so alam natin, for instance, throughout decades, a lot of terrorist groups got into Philippines, got into Mindanao via some of our neighboring countries, including Malaysia. No, and back in the days in Marwan, no, yung Malaysian terrorists got into Philippines. And that was essentially how the Mama Sapano thing happened, right? Because President Aquino wanted to go after that terrorist person, and next thing you know, the whole, the whole massacre thing happened. Okay, let's go to this. So, ayon kay President Marcos Jr., this visit is very important. Remember, last year, his first two visits were to neighboring countries, Indonesia, the biggest economy, the biggest nation in Southeast Asia, and the other one, Singapore, the most developed, the most advanced, the most wealthy country in Southeast Asia. But Malaysia is also a big player, as we mentioned a while ago. So President Marcos left kahapon, Malaysia, for a 3-day state visit. No, state visit to. So mas mataas siya dun sa level ng kanyang pagbisita dun sa Indonesia and Singapore, at least technically speaking, because if I'm not mistaken, those visits were just official visits, no? Nevertheless, of course, the treatment he got in Indonesia and Singapore was almost state visit level, but this one to Malaysia is officially a state visit. So the highest levels of honors is given to this at meet niya, or he has already met the King of Malaysia, the royalty in Malaysia, but also the head of state, or head of government, sorry, for that matter, Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim. And I'm sure he's going to have a very packed schedule, going to meet a lot of business groups. He's going to meet Filipino businessmen, Filipino community there. So we're going to follow that over the coming days. So ayon kay President Marcos, building on past successes, this state visit to Malaysia aims to identify new areas of synergies that can propel our partnership and serve as a roadmap for respective agencies to work on for the mutual benefit of our countries and the peoples of the new centuries. Like, okay, ang haba. Okay, it's a pre-departure speech, kaya palang haba. Just a nice advice to President Marcos Jr. Maybe you want to get a speechwriter who can, do it a little bit with more economy of language, right? Everything he said there could be actually been said in just a sentence and a half, right? All paragraph level na yan. Generally, kung paragraph long yung sentence, unless you're Gabriel Marquez writing Autumn of the Patriarch, right? Unless it's a literary device, that means the person is not a very good writer, right? You have to be crisp in sentences, boom, boom, boom. So medyo mahaba masyado mga sentences. So just a point of advice, siguro kailangan medyo ayus-ayusin yung mga speeches na yan. I believe that this is an opportune time to harness the potentials of a revitalized relationship between the Philippines and Malaysia. Actually, that makes sense. As I said, revitalizing relations between Philippines and Malaysia because you have a prime minister in Malaysia whose heart is very close to the Philippines, someone who has followed Philippine history very closely. I mean, of course, in a scholarly fashion first, in an activist fashion back in the day. You look at the Ilustrados, you look at our revolution in the past, you looked at our People Power Revolution. He was very inspired by Ninoy, among others. But this is a prime minister who was also very pragmatic. So he has built a very good rapport with with President Marcos Jr. for that matter. So I think this is a time really for a special relationship between Malaysia and Philippines in ways that we haven't had ever, really, to be honest about it. Because our relationship with Malaysia was always haunted by a whole host of issues. The Sabah crisis, the war in Mindanao because of suspicions, actually more than suspicions, that Malaysia was backing rebel groups in the Philippines back in the day precisely to distract us from the Sabah issue. But in fairness, naman over the past decade or so, Malaysia has been more and more a constructive partner, including helping us with the Bangsamoro negotiations and the peace process there, which, thanks to efforts of both President Aquino and President Duterte, has moved in the right direction. But obviously, there's no room for complacency. Mahabang usapan yan. Now, Marcos being Marcos, he's always going to focus first on economic issues because perhaps he feels this is something closer to his heart. He's more comfortable with it. But more importantly, because perhaps he doesn't want to discuss the more intractable geopolitical issues. So he has framed his visit to Malaysia as one that is a lot about economics, trade, investments, banking. So one of the areas is, and I think actually there's a lot of potential for the Philippines, especially small and medium enterprises in the Philippines, is yung halal food exports. I think, sa Pilipinas, relatively small yung population ng ating mga Muslim brothers and sisters, under 10%. And there's a whole industry, right, to cater to the halal needs of our Muslim brothers and sisters from Quiapo all the way to Mindanao. My sense, though, is, and I think I completely agree with discussions by economists and experts back in the day when we hosted ASEAN back in 2017, was that actually there's a big room for us to get into the halal food export industry. We have very, very world-class catering services dito sa Pilipinas, and if they can also have a section that really goes into halal food production, we can export huge levels, to Malaysia, to Indonesia, to southern Thailand, not to mention, of course, our own Muslim community, millions strong Muslim community in Philippines. So that's one thing. So, and vice versa. Malaysia is, of course, also looking at exporting halal food to the Philippines. So there's a lot that we can discuss here. So ayon kay President Marcos, halal is expected to grow to $1 trillion industry in the international market as its global demand continues to expand. Of course, I think the president has its mind a much more global picture, including us exporting to Middle East, exporting to Bangladesh, India, those kinds of countries. There's a lot of room for halal exports. So manufacturing in keeping with Islam's Sharia law. So for instance, Islam has very strict laws on how you, paano mo butcher yung isang, obviously, bawal ang pork, but even how you butcher, for instance, for beef, for instance, there's a process there. There's a religious process. There are religious injunctions and some very strict hygienic implications, good hygienic implications. That's why, safest food, best food for me among them are always halal foods. When I go abroad, I want to play safe, I eat halal food. Malaysia is one of the global leaders in this sector, and the visit aims to forge synergies with Malaysia for the Philippines to enjoy a share of this market. So I think what the president is saying here is that, medyo malabo mag-export tayo sa Malaysia per se, but we can learn from Malaysia and export to other countries in South Asia, in the Middle East, among others. No, Marcos also said that Malaysia visit would also explore cooperation on Islamic banking, which, quote, will assist our nation's trajectory of economic growth. I think the Philippines is not much of a player really in the Islamic financing banking sector yet, but that's one of the things we have to really look at. So Islamic banking follows principles such as the sharing of profits and risks and bans on interest payments. Ito ay ayon dun sa Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. As I said, the very prudential ang approach ng Islamic banking and financing, no? So what really the president is looking at is working with Malaysia, learning from Malaysia, because let's be honest, Malaysia is ahead of us on so many fronts. It's a far more developed country in terms of manufacturing. It already is a big player in the Islamic financing, halal food export industry. We can enter into that. And as I said, it's a country that also shares a lot of geopolitical interests and strategic interests with us. One of which is how to deal with China. And I've written a lot on Malaysia. I visited Malaysia also earlier this year. I gave a talk at the Malaysian, military academy. So we had good conversation with our friends in the Malaysian Navy, among others, earlier this year. Dyan sa Putrajaya, my sense with Malaysia is that actually they have handled their China relations pretty well. I mean, they don't have a treaty alliance with the US, so that gives them a lot of vulnerability. Wala silang backup. But considering that, Malaysia is becoming more and more assertive dyan sa West Philippine Sea and South China Sea. In fact, when I was in Malaysia and I wrote a piece on this, let me bring out that piece actually. the issue of South China actually was a big one. Because if you listen to people who really don't know what's happening or not following up on things closely, they'll think that, oh, Malaysia, oh, of course they're friendly to China, mga ano lang yan. But actually, things have been changing dramatically since 2019. I interviewed Prime Minister Mahathir when he was in the Philippines back in 2019, and it was very clear that Malaysia is becoming more and more assertive, no, sa South China's issue. And in fact, what's interesting is Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, who used to be in the opposition for a very long time, very critical of then Razak administration's very friendly, or some would say Tatay style relationship with China, he has come under attack. He came under attack actually recently, especially earlier in April when I was there. It's a thing article. So China, the heated center of Malaysia's new politics. A thing article for more details. You can check that yourself. Let me just bring that out. Don't worry, we're gonna transition to Maharlika Sovereign Wealth Fund soon. But I just want to emphasize this thing. Kasi Malaysia, katulad ng Pilipinas, may mga, ano rin sila, they also have interest in the West Philippine Sea. They have, I think, 5 or 6 land features under their control, including Layang-Layang, no? So, actually, even in Malaysia, malaking issue ito yung West Philippine Sea issue. And ironically, and interestingly, Anwar Ibrahim came under attack by implying that he's open to joint development agreement with China dyan sa South China Sea or areas within Malaysia's exclusive economic zone and continental shelf. And the people who criticized him were actually people who used to be part of the very party of former Prime Minister Najib Razak, who's the bête noire of Anwar Ibrahim. And Anwar Ibrahim back in the day was accusing Najib Razak of being soft on China. So it's like, I don't know how should I put it. It's like members of PDP Laban criticizing, I don't know, Lenny for not being tough enough on China, something like that. Just to give a crude state of events. So, in fact, Muhyiddin Yassin, who was one of the old guards of the back in the day when Najib was in power, he said that just this suggestion that Malaysia is open to negotiations, I think in term, if China feels this is their right, Malaysia is open to negotiations, referring to exploration, joint exploration of energy resources. I think sinabi ni Anwar Ibrahim nun. Sabi ni Muhyiddin Yassin, yung dating Prime Minister and now opposition leader, sabi niya, this potentially threatens the national sovereignty, right? Because Anwar was ostensibly referring to areas, quote, within Malaysia's territory that cannot be negotiated over or demanded by China. So very sensitive na rin itong issue ng South China Sea, West Philippine Sea. And interestingly, people who were part of administrations that used to be soft on China are now trying to play even tougher on China. What's interesting thing though is, even as Malaysia has stepped up its assertiveness sa West Philippine Sea. So for instance, Malaysia already submitted an extended continental shelf claim back in the 2009 with Vietnam, but also in 2019, 10 years later exactly, Malaysia also submitted another extended continental shelf. Anong ibig sabihin yan? So they're claiming exclusive rights to, yung below sea continental shelf resources way beyond 200 nautical miles of their coastline deep into the South China Sea. So they keep on claiming more and more of that area. So they're very aggressive in that. And in spite of doing that, in spite of challenging also China, so for instance, ang Malaysia po, yung Petronas nila, yung kanilang energy giant, has pushed ahead with unilateral drilling and energy exploration in areas that are claimed by both Vietnam and China. So they're very, very aggressive in that. And in spite of all of that, they don't have an alliance with the US. Their military is not the biggest in the world, but much better and more sophisticated than ours. In spite of that, in spite of legally and oil energy-wise unilaterally pushing the envelope against China's claims, still their trade with China is immense. So bilateral trade actually pierced $200 billion recently. And when Anwar Ibrahim went to China earlier this year, he was offered almost twice more than what Bongbong Marcos or Duterte were offered. He was offered almost $39 billion, from China, which has already invested tens of billions of dollars in Malaysia's infrastructure. That's in stark contrast to Duterte, who goes to China, offered $24 billion, not much comes in, and the other next thing you know, Duterte is saying, let's still be nice to China no matter what because baka magkaroon ng giyera. I mean, just look at the case of Malaysia, right? Not really a kind of a military superpower, but they're getting tougher on China in the South China Sea, and yet they're also getting more and more trade investments from them. Kaya para sa akin, would be nice to see how Anwar Ibrahim will politely advise Marcos. I don't think Marcos needs an advice. I think Marcos has understood this, no? Na you need to play this smart with China, right? You have to be friendly and cordial, but not weak and wimpy. You have to be tough in the South China Sea and West Philippine Sea, but you can also explore greater trade and investment ties. Because if you are a serious economy, if you really have something to offer, China will invest in you. In fact, even during Aquino's era, China's trade with the Philippines expanded. Even if ang grabe yung geopolitical relations natin noon. Because, Chinese investments, a lot of times, are actually driven by actual considerations of investment conditions, right? So even if besh yung Philippines and China under Duterte, many Chinese investors felt Philippines is not the right place to invest in. For the same reason that a lot of Western investors have second thoughts about our country. So my sense is Malaysia's a thing or two to share with the Philippines in terms of how to manage relations with China, not confront China fully, but also not to be wimpy and soft, but also get the most possible out of this, right? So that's very interesting. In fact, yung Philippine GDP and Malaysian GDP are more or less the same size now, so nakahabol na tayo in terms of general size. But of course, Malaysia has a very small population compared to ours. So there's really a lot that we can learn from Malaysia. But speaking of learning from Malaysia, this is where things get interesting. Earlier this year, Anwar Ibrahim, I think ito yung interview with ANC, no? Actually, dito ako believe sa ABS-CBN, no? Even if medyo wala na sila sa eksena sa Pilipinas, because they still have that prestige, they can arrange interviews with top leaders, foreign leaders. When foreign leaders visit the Philippines, immediately they have interviews arranged with ABS-CBN, no? So that tells you about the prestige that ABS-CBN has. I mean, in fairness to them. Let me just bring this out. Nasaan na ba yan? Ito. Okay. So, this is where it gets interesting. So, earlier this year, si Anwar Ibrahim ng Malaysia, he said the Philippines must learn from Malaysia dun sa, experience sila sa 1MDB. So let's discuss this. No, let's discuss this. I thought Anwar is gonna be more private about this advice because I remember nung na-interview ko si Mahathir was very diplomatic when I asked about drug war. So he indirectly criticized Duterte by saying yung drug problem galing naman sa abroad yan. Alam naman natin saan galing mga karamihan ng droga. Alam nyo na yan, connected dots. So he didn't say that, Duterte was wrong in drug war, but he indirectly kind of said, well, maybe you were barking at the wrong tree, no? And then, but he was more forceful doon sa China investment. He said, we have to make sure these are quality investments, they create jobs, they help with technology transfer, etc. So I think that was much more direct. And in fact, after yung interview ko with Mahathir back in 2019, immediately my response yung Malacanang is something like defending, no, we're scrutinizing the Chinese investment very well to make sure it's in consonance with our national interests, etc. But dito with Anwar Ibrahim, bago pa lang siya, I mean, he's barely November he came into power, right? So you're talking about someone that was just barely half a year into office. Medyo, he doesn't have any qualms with openly discussing, potential advice for BBM, considering how Maharlika is so close to the heart of BBM, not heart, just family branding. So, ayon kay Anwar Ibrahim, the Malaysian government is willing to settle with other banks and okay, ganito. So ito yun just a background. Ang gulo kasi itong 1MDB na yan eh. So itong sovereign wealth fund ng Malaysia had tentacles all over the world, including investments in funds abroad, including in Abu Dhabi. So it's all over the place, no? So apparently Abu Dhabi state funds earlier agreed to settle a $1.8 billion na napunta sa kanilang dapat hindi napunta. So ang gulo nito. So ito to. I'm just trying to find the advice from. So it could not have happened in that scale if international financial institutions like Goldman Sachs were not complicit in this crime. It's a tough stance. We cleared it with. So what he's saying is that ang nangyari sa sovereign wealth fund nila is nakiteam up pa dun sa mga dodgy investment vehicles, and next thing you know kung saan napunta yung investment nila, including dun sa production ng Wolf of Wall Street, no? So ito. So yung 1MDB, the scandal was a large-scale money laundering conspiracy in 2015 that involved then Prime Minister Najib Razak, ngayon pinakulong na siya, who allegedly transferred over 2.6 billion Malaysian ringgit from Malaysia's sovereign wealth fund to his personal bank account. So part of that didn't even go to dodgy investment. Part of that went straight to his personal account, right? So reports said that the scandal was exposed after a document leaked from the Wall Street Journal showed the embezzlement, with the U.S. Department of Justice discovering that more than $4.5 billion was diverted from 1MDB to global conspirators, including officials from Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, etc. So ang ginagawa na ngayon ng Malaysia is sinusu nila yung mga individuals or institutions in other countries, including so sa Britain, for instance, they had a court case against an Abu Dhabi-based state institutions in order to recover these funds, no? So ang hirap kasi once the fund is there and then the money goes all over the place, ang hirap i-retrieve yan even when you have a proof clear as daylight na may corruption na nangyari. And then dun nga sa 1MDB, one accusation is that a big portion, hundreds of millions of dollars, 700 million I think, ended up straight in the bank account affiliated with the former prime minister. So we have this very, very serious, no? We have this very, very serious, troublingly serious precedent in a country like Malaysia. And this is where it gets interesting, diba? Meron tayong mga henyo dyan na feeling experts. Pag parliamentary system tayo, we're gonna be like first world. Well, guess what? Parliamentary system Malaysia, look at the corruption level in that country, right? And dun sa mga henyo na walang alam sa economics, etc., the reason why Malaysia is wealthy is not because of their parliamentary system. It's because, they have such a small population, huge oil and gas resources, Petronas, etc., not to mention their positions on Malacca Strait, close to Singapore. So there are many factors that explain. But look at it, their political form of government, parliamentary system, has not created a more stable, prosperous, stable democratic system, and definitely it has not insulated them from corruption. So what Anwar Ibrahim, and there's so much more I can discuss that about internal politics of Malaysia, but let's not get there. But the thing is, Anwar Ibrahim is suggesting that pag-aralan nyo sana na mabuti yung nangyari. Kasi sa Malaysia nga, relatively developed country, right? Relatively advanced country, nangyari yung ganitong kalokohan. So, good luck na lang sa Pilipinas. Tignan nyo, mabuti na hindi mangyari yan sa Maharlika. Kaya nga, for me, nasasayangan ako dun sa sona ni Marcos na he didn't even make an effort to properly defend it. I don't know, because he felt it's not defensible enough. He felt it's not worth to get in the debate. He felt, or perhaps he didn't have enough explanation that he could offer as an assurance. I don't know. But the reality is that hindi maganda ang reputasyon ng Maharlika Sovereign Wealth Fund so far for the top experts, independent experts, hindi yung mga independent experts. And you talk to a lot of investors, they're kind of like, I'm not very sure about that. Wait and see na lang at best, no? So I hope the conversation with Anwar Ibrahim will go well, and I hope that Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim gives good friendly advice on the need to reassure the investors, to reassure the Philippine people that hindi mangyari yung mga kalokohan na nangyari sa 1MDB sa Malaysia dun sa Maharlika Sovereign Wealth Fund. But again, the big difference between Philippines and Malaysia is that they have wealth. They have they have a lot of surplus funds, right? Because they're an net energy exporting country, right? With a very small population, right? Siguro yung population ng Manila and National Capital Region, yun na yung population ng buong Malaysia, right? So again, I think this trip is gonna be interesting, and I'm gonna look for whether there are gonna be reports about some conversations on this. But what I don't expect to be really discussed in any serious sense, if discussed at all, is a Saba case. And doon sa mga nagsasabi na, bakit yung mga dilawan hindi nagsasalita? Like, wait lang, si Digong ba? Did Digong raise the Saba issue? Diba? I mean, you wanna play the whataboutism, let's play that game, right? Anong ginawa ni Digong nung nasa Malaysia siya, nang bumisa siya Malaysia? Anong ginawa ni Digong nung na-meet niya si Mahathir? Multiple occasions, including one time just to watch the match of Pacquiao, right? Did he raise the Saba issue? No, he didn't. He didn't raise it. I know it for a fact. He didn't raise the issue. So, yung mga nagmamaganda dyan, lalo yung mga, yung mga pro-China elements dyan na, may agenda na to push the discussion in different direction. Well, kamusta naman yung tatay niya, yung favorite niyong presidente, di ba? Yung most pro-Beijing president in ASEAN, right? In recent memory. Kamusta naman? Na-discuss pa niya yung Sabah? He didn't. He did not. So, wag kayong magmaganda dyan bago kayo mag-comment. Now, what's my opinion in this? Should we discuss Sabah? Okay, let's discuss Sabah, but what are we gonna do about it? Right? Do we have a strategy of taking them to international court over this? Uh, do we have a strategy of, well, actually, the case was taken to international court by folks from Sulu Sultanate, right? And there was a ruling in Europe earlier this year, but I didn't see any response by top officials. So in short, wag mo nang pag-usapan kung wala kang I mean, kung pag-usapan mo yun with Malaysia, panindigan mo yan and be prepared for retaliation from Malaysia because this is a very sensitive issue. No Malaysian Prime Minister can survive politically and otherwise if he's seen as weak on the Sabah issue because they're still angry about what happened back in 2013, di ba? Nung sinugod ng mga affiliates ng Sulu Sultan, etc. Yung Sabah, ang gulo nun. Sobrang gulo na nangyari ng panahon na yan. Alala mo ba yan? So, ayoko yung style na magmamaganda ka lang para lang gumawa ka ng gulo. Kung if you want to play tough with Malaysia, be prepared for consequences. And on Sabah, you have to have a realistic strategy. Are you gonna back the arbitration case of Sultan Sulu 1? Then be prepared for retaliation by China, by Malaysia, right? If you push them on Sabah issue, be prepared for Malaysia not to be helpful to us on other issues, from Bangsamoro, Mindanao issues, to counterterrorism cooperation, to joint maritime patrols dun sa mga borders natin, to South China Sea, West Philippine Sea, to ASEAN. So, I'm just saying, if yung mga iba, una-una, bago kayo magmaganda, ano ulit ang ginawa ng tatay nyo? Pangalawa, if we're gonna go on this Sabah issue, what is our real strategy? Aside from performative, pa-cute, ganyan-ganyan, di ba? So, I don't know. I think the agreement is just not to discuss it at all because the Philippine government doesn't seem to have any kind of reasonable or, robust strategy to deal with this issue. And what? Gigerayin natin ang Malaysia over Sabah? Ganito na lang. The best way to deal with this, because Sabah is not West Philippine Sea, it's a very different issue because you have how many million people, how many hundreds of thousands of people are there in Sabah? I think the best thing is to ask people in Sabah what they really want. My suspicion is, if they really had their chance, some would say they would really want to be on their own. They don't want to be part of Philippines probably, and they don't want to be part of Malaysia still. So, I don't know. Baka yan ang mas magandang pag-usapan. Pero, that's my thing nakakairita yung mga ganyan style na i-erase nila yung Sabah to what? What are you trying? What is your agenda there? Right? And yung mga nagsasaba-saba ni iba dyan, marami sa kanila, ito yung mga tao na medyo duwag, walang ginawa nung time na binubuli tayo. As in ngayon, in these years, sa panahon natin ngayon, dyan sa West Philippine Sea. So, yun lang sinasabi natin. Alright, I'll end on that note. Let's wait for more updates. Hindi ko na napuntahan tuloy yung issue ng... kasi, interesting din kasi yung Martin-Sar dynamics na yan. Pero sa Sabah kasi tayo medyo mahabang usapan din yan eh. No, I mean, for me, if there's gonna be one thing that I'm gonna say is this. I agree with the analysis that both Marcos and Sara have an interest in keeping their alliance together all the way to 2028 so that it's smooth sailing for both of them. I agree with that. Yeah, I think both of them have an interest in that. Will that be the case? I don't know. It depends. And politicos being politicos, at the end of the day, they're bound by shared interests. Marcos, Martin, Sara, all of them have an interest in making sure hindi sila mag-away-away. So yung mga opposition na iba dyan, na tuwan-tuwa dun sa mga away ng Uniteam, etc. recently, well, it's not inconsequential. It surely shows that there's a room for maneuver and their vulnerabilities and fragility, but never be complacent, right? Yun lang. Let's not forget, despite rivalry and whatever, still the Uniteam happened in 2022 and it was the most powerful alliance we have seen in any Philippine elections in recent memory, if not in the past half a century or so. So don't also overestimate divisions within Uniteam. It's just part of politics, competition, ego, everything. But at the end of the day, they have a lot in common. They have a lot of shared interests. And that shared interest is what's going to hold them together, right? More likely than not. So opposition has to really be prepared to mobilize on its own and not just wait and schadenfreude its way to the next elections. It's just not gonna work that way. All right. Now, if indeed there's a total conflagration dyan sa Uniteam, then ibang usapan na yan. But so far, I don't see any indication of that. I see fragility, I see internal competition, but Sara and Marcos have all the reasons in the universe to keep it together all the way to 2028. Yun lang. On that note, thank you very much and have a good day. Thank you very much. Ay, sino ba yung mga nandito? Sino yung troll dyan? Oh, Nicolas Nunag. Ano naman pinagsasabi mo dyan, pare? Okay, ano naman yung mga duwag na trolls. Okay, thank you nga tayo dito. Salamat din kay Noemi Tablare, Michael Uy, Ma'am Jocelyn Limberio, Eden Olonan, yan. Mga usual suspects, friends natin, Rizani, Sorenses, yan. Yan, Annabelle Gamoras, yan. Dami nagmamahal sa atin, Bags Lugas, Estelita Durante. Thank you very much. Really appreciate your support. And yan, talakayan natin, di ba? As much as travel. Kamusta naman ang sa isa ng mga travel na yan? On that note, thank you very much, guys, and talk to you soon.